Hi guys. Tonight we find ourselves stepping into a medieval battle camp, and you feel the icy wind bite at your cheeks. Before you even realize how thin your cloak island, the air smells of smoke, damp wool and sweat, and the dim canvas of tents stretches out before you like a sea of shadows. Already the sun is collapsing toward the horizon, and each moment brings another degree of cold. Soldiers shuffle past you, boots dragging through churned mud hardened by frost, and you notice their breath rising in cloudy plumes. You probably won't survive this, at least not with the warmth and comfort you've grown used to in your modern bed. But they did, night after night, in conditions that would make most of us crumble within hours. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, let me know your location and your local time in the comments. I always love seeing where and when you're listening. Now, dim the lights. You trudge deeper into the camp, your ears filled with the steady rhythm of hammers against wood, as makeshift stakes are driven into the earth to support sagging tents. The cold is not just an inconvenience, it is an enemy in itself. Chroniclers of medieval campaigns often wrote about how winter claimed more soldiers than sword or spear. During the 100 Years' War, for instance, armies struggled not only with their foes, but with frost that cut into fingers and froze barrels of ale into useless blocks. Historians still debate whether commanders underestimated the impact of climate, or whether soldiers simply endured because they had no other choice. You glance around. The camp feels both alive and fragile, like a great beast with thousands of tiny hearts beating beneath thin canvas walls. Each tent is its own pocket of survival, no stronger than the men inside it. At dusk, when fires begin to flicker, you notice how quickly darkness reclaims the edges of the world. The sound of men muttering about the day's march, of cooks clanging pots, of horses stamping against the cold ground, all fills the space between the shivering silences. The ground beneath you is stiff, almost brittle, and as you crouch you realize that the earth itself seems to crackle under pressure. Soldiers hated this. The frozen floor of the camp was unyielding, stealing heat from their bodies whenever they tried to rest. That's why some carried bundles of straw or bracken, though tonight you see many without such luxury, resigned to lie on bare ground. The firelight throws long orange shadows across faces, highlighting hollow cheeks and tired eyes. There's a curious detail whispered among them. Soldiers sometimes swore they could hear the earth groan beneath the frost, like a hidden monster waiting for weakness. It was probably just shifting soil and cracking ice, but when you're exhausted and half frozen, myths creep in easily. After all, isn't it easier to fear a monster than to accept the indifference of nature? As you move past the lines of tents, you notice their arrangement neat rows like a makeshift village, though one where no one intends to stay. Medieval commanders often placed tents with military precision, knowing order itself could keep morale from unraveling. And yet, some tents sag, patched with mismatched fabric, their ropes frayed. Inside, men prepare for the night with rituals of habit, wrapping cloaks, rubbing hands, whispering prayers. A few hold tiny wax candles, cupping them against the wind, shadows trembling across their faces. The soundscape grows layered, the crack of firewood splitting, the low murmur of Latin prayers from a priest walking among the ranks, the snort of horses restless with hunger. Somewhere, a group of men sing a bawdy song to distract themselves from the creeping frost. It's off-key, and the laughter that follows is forced, but you sense the desperate attempt to keep spirits alive. A soldier nearby mutters about how the Romans supposedly rubbed themselves with oil to stay warm. Another scoffs, claiming the Vikings slept in snowdrifts for fun. Historians still argue whether medieval soldiers genuinely believed these comparisons or simply used them as coping jokes. Either way, it's clear, humor was as much a shield as a spear. You pause to feel the cold more deeply. It settles in layers, not just in your skin but in your bones, in your breath. It doesn't rush, it seeps. The wool of your cloak itches, damp at the edges, barely holding warmth. The soldiers feel it too. Their faces are gaunt, their lips cracked. Fingers shake as they adjust straps and buckles. And yet, they endure. Because the camp is more than just canvas and cloth, it is the illusion of safety, the one fragile barrier between life and death in a winter war. You watch a boy, hardly older than 16, stamping his feet to keep circulation moving. He whispers something under his breath, likely a prayer to Saint Sebastian, patron of soldiers. His tent mate laughs, teasing him, but the boy continues anyway. Faith, after all, was another blanket against the night. And just beyond him, another man lies already sprawled in the dirt, cloak pulled over his head, too exhausted to care. That is the strange truth of these camps. Exhaustion often outweighed fear. When the body demands rest, even cold steel and colder winds cannot deny it. And so, as the first stars prick the sky, you realize the camp itself is falling into rhythm. Fires glow brighter, voices drop softer, and the long night begins its slow claim. The first fire sparks, and with it comes the desperate scramble for warmth. You huddle near a circle of men who are crouched low, striking flints against steel with practiced motions. Each strike releases a tiny burst of light, a momentary star against the suffocating dark. The sparks fall onto a nest of dry tinder twigs, straw, a shred of linen too worn to patch clothing, and the men blow carefully until smoke curls upward. At last, a faint flame trembles into existence, fragile as a newborn. You feel the small heat on your face, almost unreal against the biting wind. For medieval soldiers, this ritual was more than convenience, it was survival. Fire turned a frozen night into something tolerable. Chroniclers noted that during Edward III's campaigns, armies carried not only swords and pikes, but also sacks of flint and steel. A soldier could march without shoes, but without the means to light a fire, he would not last long. Historians still argue whether commanders formally distributed fire-starting supplies, or whether soldiers bartered and scavenged them like treasure. Either way, fire was as sacred as any relic. The flames spread quickly, small circles of light blooming across the camp, each surrounded by men holding out their hands, palms raw and cracked. The fires give off a mixture of smells: burning pine resin, damp straw sizzling, grease dripped from meat roasting over spits. Smoke lingers low, stinging your eyes. But no one complains, it is the perfume of survival. Around you, soldiers lean closer, faces glowing orange, eyes hollow with relief. One man pulls a chunk of salted pork from a sack and spears it on a stick, letting fat drip into the fire with a hiss. Another tosses dried peas into a pot, hoping for a stew by morning. The sound of sizzling flesh mingles with the soft chatter of voices, grim tales of battles past, crude jokes, murmured prayers. The fire draws them into a temporary family, a circle of light against the endless dark. You catch snippets of conversation, complaints about frozen boots, laughter at a comrade's snoring, whispers about whether the enemy will strike before dawn. And then, almost instinctively, the men shift their bodies outward, using their own shoulders and backs as a shield against the wind. The campfire becomes a shared hearth, every man responsible for guarding its fragile glow. In that arrangement lies a curious fact. Fire was not just heat, it was discipline. Soldiers who let a flame die were often punished harshly, for one extinguished fire could doom an entire group to misery. The sparks rise into the night sky, a spray of golden flecks carried by the wind. They drift upward until swallowed by the stars. You watch the men's eyes follow them, a momentary trance, as though each spark were a prayer rising heavenward. There is a strange, almost mystical quality in those brief glimmers, hope contained in seconds of light. Some medieval superstitions even claimed that sparks carried omens, predicting the course of tomorrow's battle. Historians still debate whether such beliefs were widely held or merely romantic inventions of later storytellers. But in this moment, you feel how easily a man might trust a spark when death and cold surround him. One soldier, his hands scarred from years of service, begins to tell a story about Alexander the Great's men, who supposedly carried portable braziers of coals across frozen steppes. Another insists it was the Mongols who perfected that trick, though no one here has ever seen a Mongol. The stories don't matter, the act of telling them keeps the fire company, and the fire, in turn, keeps the men alive. The glow spreads outward. Tents no longer seem like flimsy cloth, but like caves illuminated from within. The camp itself breathes differently now, every flicker of flame casting shadows of lances and helmets onto canvas walls. You realize how profoundly light changes everything. An army half dead from cold transforms into a living community with the strike of a flint. You lean closer, feeling the heat on your face while your back still freezes. That contrast was familiar to soldiers scalding on one side, numb on the other. Many simply rotated slowly like meat on a spit, giving each limb its turn at survival. One quirky tidbit you overhear: some men swore rubbing garlic cloves on their skin kept the cold out. Was it true? Likely not, but hope is its own insulation. As the night thickens, you hear the camp grow quieter. Fires burn steadily now, guarded by those too anxious to sleep. Beyond the circle, darkness deepens, full of rustling branches and the occasional distant howl of a wolf. You feel the tension. The enemy is not the only danger lurking in the night. And yet, inside this fragile ring of firelight, you sense a kind of defiance. The soldiers have not beaten the cold, but for now they have bought themselves a few hours of uneasy warmth. You crouch inside one of the tents, the cloth walls sagging as wind presses against them like an unseen hand. The canvas is coarse, stiff with age, and patched in more places than you can count. It smells of mildew, wet wool, and faint smoke from a nearby fire. The moment you step in, the cold shifts. It is not gone, merely muffled, softened like a growl turned into a whisper. The ground beneath you is unforgiving, hard earth slick with frost, and even the straw strewn across it cannot disguise the chill that seeps through. You realize this is what soldiers accepted as home during long campaigns: thin fabric and a prayer. Contemporary accounts make it clear that tents were issued sparingly. Officers and nobles received the sturdiest pavilions, often brightly coloured and grand enough to be mistaken for a lord's hall, while common soldiers shared low, cramped shelters of rough canvas. In some campaigns, men were expected to carry the poles themselves, staggering under their weight after days of marching. One French chronicler described them as beast-burdened yet men, highlighting how survival depended as much on hauling shelter as wielding a sword. You glance around. Inside this cramped space, 4 or 5 soldiers huddle together, their cloaks wrapped tightly. The tent is too small to stand upright. Everyone must crouch or sit cross-legged. They place their weapons near the entrance, within reach in case of a midnight attack. Even in sleep, war never leaves them. The space feels more like a burrow than a dwelling, a place where exhaustion wrestles with vigilance. And here's an odd superstition. Some men believed that scratching a cross on the tent wall kept evil spirits, and even cold winds, from entering. It's strange to think that a quick etching with a knife blade might stand against winter itself. Yet when the darkness pressed close, such gestures became comforting rituals. You run your hand across the wall and imagine countless invisible crosses layered over years of desperate nights. Researchers remain divided on how effective these tents truly were. Some argue that canvas shelters, when properly pitched and banked with earth, offered significant protection. Others counter that the thin fabric did little, and soldiers may have relied more on body heat and shared bedding than the walls themselves. Archaeological finds of medieval tent fragments show heavy linen treated with oil or wax, suggesting attempts at waterproofing, though whether that kept warmth in is still debated. As you settle on the straw floor, you notice how the fabric flutters at every gust, sighing as though alive. Each draft snakes across the ground, chilling your ankles. The men curse softly, tugging cloaks tighter. One soldier jokes that if you pressed your nose too hard against the wall, Frostbite would claim it before dawn. The laughter is weak, but it spreads. Humor, here, is as precious as fire. The claustrophobia grows as the night deepens. Outside, the campfires crackle, their glow faint through the seams of canvas. Inside, shadows press in. The soldiers shift, finding places to lean against one another, backs propped, heads nodding. You catch the quiet rhythm of breathing, the occasional cough, the rustle of straw. In this strange chorus, the tent becomes a womb of exhaustion. One curious trick surfaces. Soldiers sometimes placed heated stones or bricks from the fire at the center of their shelter, covering them with earth to prevent burns. The warmth would last for hours, radiating like a hidden heart. The problem, of course, was carrying such stones after marching miles. Still, the thought that men once slept around glowing rocks makes you smile at human inventiveness. The tent itself is an emblem of hierarchy. Nobles reclined on raised bedding with thick furs, while foot soldiers scraped by with straw mats. Some records describe commanders holding councils in heated pavilions, while their men froze only a few yards away. The inequality was stark, yet ordinary soldiers rarely questioned it. Cold was expected, suffering was assumed. You, on the other hand, feel every draft like a personal insult. A soldier at your side mutters about how he longs for the warmth of a hearth back home, where his mother would place logs so large they burned through the night. Another describes how in his village, people slept in barns, pressed between cows for heat. These comparisons hurt more than they comfort, for they remind each man that home is far away, and the night will not end quickly. There's a soft tapping against the canvas rain, or perhaps sleet. The sound multiplies until it becomes a steady drumming, like distant applause. Water seeps through the seams, dripping onto cloaks and straw. The men shuffle, cursing, but there is little to do. Waterproofing was never perfect, and tents often became damp cages. Chroniclers even wrote of soldiers waking to find ice forming along the fabric, sparkling in morning light like cruel jewels. Strange as it seems, some men considered such discomfort almost reassuring. The suffering was proof of endurance, a mark of brotherhood. When you froze, so did everyone else. When your cloak stiffened with frost, you knew your comrades did too. Solidarity was stitched into the canvas as surely as the seams. You lie down at last, cloak pulled tight, the straw crackling under your weight. The cold presses into your bones, yet your body adjusts, searching for warmth where little exists. Outside, the fires dim. Inside, you feel the slow surrender to exhaustion. And so you understand. These rough cloth shelters were not comfort, nor luxury, but symbols of endurance. Every gust rattling the canvas was a reminder that the night belonged to the cold, and only stubborn will keep the men inside alive until dawn. You shift closer to the men inside the tent, and immediately you notice the way their bodies press against each other, shoulders overlapping, knees tucked in tight. It isn't accidental. This is deliberate survival. Soldiers knew instinctively that sharing body heat could mean the difference between waking up stiff but alive or not waking up at all. You lean into the circle, and the warmth from human contact, faint though it is, spreads like a hidden fire. Accounts from campaigns in Flanders and Germany describe men sleeping in pairs or groups, their cloaks pulled over all of them like one great blanket. Chroniclers noted the practice without judgment, just a simple fact of life. They didn't romanticize it, nor did they mock it. It was as necessary as food. Some officers even organized sleeping arrangements to ensure younger recruits shared with seasoned veterans, believing their endurance would somehow rub off through the night. An odd belief floated through some camps, that the closer you slept to a comrade's chest, the less likely you were to dream of death. Strange as it sounds, the mingling of breath, the sound of a heartbeat, and the weight of another body pressed close might have been enough to trick the mind into peace. One soldier once scrawled in a letter that he felt shielded by the very breath of my fellow. Peculiar but revealing comfort in war was often found in such fragile details. Specialists in medieval military life still disagree over how organized these sleeping patterns were. Did commanders enforce them to maintain discipline, or did men naturally gravitate toward one another out of instinct? Some scholars suggest that enforced proximity reduced desertion, as no one wanted to abandon the man beside him in the freezing dark. Others argue the practice was spontaneous, an unspoken pact of survival rather than a military order. Whatever the truth, you can feel the practicality of it as you sit there, shoulder to shoulder, the shared warmth creeping into your bones. The closeness creates its own atmosphere. Breathing grows heavy, filling the tent with misty clouds. You smell unwashed wool, dried sweat, and damp straw, layered with the faint tang of smoke still clinging to their cloaks. It's not pleasant, but it is undeniably human. You notice how the men's bodies shift unconsciously, adjusting so that no one is left fully exposed. Feet press against calves, backs lean into chests, and even hands find pockets of warmth in the crooks of arms. A veteran murmurs a story about how, during a bitter winter siege, two men slept so tightly entwined that when one died in the night, the other didn't realize until morning. His voice drops quiet after this, and the tent falls into silence. It's morbid, yes, but you realize the story is less about fear and more about testament proof of how necessary closeness was, even in death. The way they arrange themselves also highlights hierarchy. Higher-ranking men might sleep with extra blankets or near small braziers, but common foot soldiers had little choice. Proximity was their only defense. In some places, they even pulled animals, dogs, goats, or chickens into tents for additional heat. It may sound ridiculous, but a warm body was a warm body, no matter its shape or smell. You feel yourself start to doze, lulled by the steady rhythm of collective breathing. Yet sleep here is never fully peaceful. Someone coughs, someone shifts, and outside the canvas walls, the wind howls. Every sound seeps in. You realize that when one man shivers, the tremor passes along the circle like a ripple. This unintentional harmony, this web of shared discomfort, is oddly reassuring. If one moves, all adjust. If one sighs, all breathe with him. One peculiar trick sometimes mentioned in journals: soldiers would rub snow on their faces before crawling into shared sleep. The idea was that the initial shock of cold would numb the body, making the warmth from others feel stronger by contrast. Was it effective? Hard to say, but you can picture the desperate logic behind it. As the night stretches, you sense how essential companionship was in a world where loneliness could be lethal. The tent feels less like a shelter of cloth and more like a human furnace, fragile but real. You can't help but think, without each other, none of them would have stood a chance. The straw rustles beneath you, brittle stalks shifting as you try to carve a hollow for your hips and shoulders. Soldiers learned early that bare earth was a thief. It leached warmth from the body until bones felt as though they rested on ice. So they spread whatever bedding they could gather: straw from nearby barns, dried bracken pulled from hillsides, even reeds collected along riverbanks. Anything to form a fragile barrier between flesh and frozen ground. Chroniclers from the Crusades remarked on the constant search for such bedding, describing men scavenging villages not just for food but for armfuls of straw. It wasn't just comfort, it was survival. Without that layer, sleep became a gamble. One English soldier's diary during the Burgundian campaigns notes bluntly, "The frost beneath is sharper than the steel above." That line alone tells you how vicious the ground could feel after a day of marching. There's a curious trick whispered among veterans: sprinkle ashes from the campfire onto the straw before lying down. The idea was that the faint warmth of the embers, even if long cooled, lingered in the ash and delayed the creeping cold. Some swore by it, others cursed it as filthy nonsense. But desperation breeds creativity, and men tried whatever they could. Academic debate continues over just how effective natural bedding really was. Archaeological digs reveal flattened impressions of straw mats preserved in frost-kissed soil, suggesting men used them regularly. Some experts argue that these mats could raise body heat retention significantly, while others counter that dampness quickly spoiled the effect, turning straw into icy sponges by morning. Either way, you can feel how vital even a thin layer must have been as you lie on it now, hearing each stalk crackle like brittle bones. The scent of the straw lingers in the air, sweet, earthy, tinged with mold. You breathe it in, and for a fleeting second it reminds you of harvest barns, of peasant homes, of something gentler than war. Perhaps soldiers felt that too, the connection between bedding and memory. Sleeping on straw wasn't just practical, it brought echoes of village life, of mothers spreading hay in lofts, of children laughing among bales. In a camp full of steel and fear, such associations might have softened the edges of misery. One man beside you boasts that he once lined his bedding with sheep's wool stolen during a raid. Another laughs, saying he spent a winter in Flanders lying on frozen turnip greens. They jest, but you can see the pride hidden beneath the idea that cleverness in bedding was as worthy as bravery in battle. Each man carried his own private catalogue of tricks, passing them along to younger recruits like secret recipes. As you shift again, you notice how the straw forms little pockets of warmth where your body presses deepest. It is uncomfortable, yes, but it is not unbearable. Your cloak spreads across it, adding another thin barrier. Soldiers often layered cloaks, blankets, and bedding until the ground almost disappeared beneath them. For the lucky ones, those who raided prosperous farms, furs might be piled beneath as well. Imagine the envy such luxury inspired. The floor of the tent is a living thing tonight. Straw crackles under every movement, rustles with every sigh. Outside, sleet rattles against canvas, but inside, the brittle bedding hums like a muted instrument. You close your eyes and imagine the countless backs, shoulders, and limbs that have pressed into straw just like this across centuries, each man fighting the same enemy, cold. One particularly strange custom surfaces in the stories. Soldiers sometimes mixed herbs like thyme or sage into their bedding, not only for fragrance but because they believed it warded off illness carried by the damp. Did it work? Modern science might doubt it, but you cannot deny the calming aroma it brought. And perhaps, when fear weighed heavy, even the illusion of health was a comfort. As dawn feels impossibly far away, you realize the bedding is more than a cushion. It is a battlefield in miniature, where men fought not against soldiers but against the merciless ground itself. Each stalk of straw, each leaf of bracken, each scrap of fur was a soldier's ally, small and humble, yet powerful enough to keep death waiting one more night. The cloak wraps tighter around your body, rough wool scratching your skin but holding in what little warmth you can muster. For medieval soldiers, cloaks weren't just garments, they were lifelines. By day they hung heavy, sometimes damp with rain, dragging across mud and thorns. But by night they transformed into blankets, tents, even pillows when folded just right. Without one, you were nearly naked against the cold. Most historians agree that soldiers rarely traveled without such cloaks. They were woven from thick wool, sometimes double-layered, and occasionally treated with oils or wax to repel moisture. A French knight might have a cloak lined with fur, rich and elegant, while a foot soldier carried one patched so many times it looked like a quilt of strangers' rags. Still, each cloak was indispensable, the one constant companion on campaign. A curious trick men practiced was to sleep with the cloak pulled over the head, creating a pocket of air that warmed with each breath. Of course, it also made breathing difficult, leading some to wake choking or dizzy. Others swore it worked better if you left a tiny gap near the mouth, just wide enough to sip fresh air while still trapping heat. You try it now, and though the air grows stuffy, you understand the temptation. Specialists continue to debate whether cloaks were truly effective in severe winters. Some argue that wool, even when damp, still retained insulating power, giving soldiers a chance against the frost. Others believe cloaks offered little more than psychological comfort, thin barriers delaying the inevitable chill. Archaeological finds of worn fragments suggest both truths. Cloaks worked, but only if maintained, and many soldiers owned ones too threadbare to serve well. Inside the tent, the soldiers fidget constantly, adjusting their cloaks like restless birds fluffing feathers. One pulls his entirely over his knees, curling tight. Another spreads his wide to cover two comrades at once. You can feel how each fold, each tug, is part of a private war against the creeping cold. The fabric rasps against your fingers, stiff in places where mud dried into ridges. Yet when you burrow deeper, it smells faintly of lanolin, earthy and oddly comforting. A veteran near you mutters that in his village, men used their cloaks as bedding for livestock before sleeping in them themselves. The beasts warm it for you, he jokes, though his tone is weary. Another swears he once saw a man twist his cloak into a makeshift rope to haul wood. It seems these garments were endlessly versatile, their use is limited only by desperation. You stretch out, cloak pulled over chin to ankle, and realize how much the mind depends on these scraps of fabric. They are not perfect, they don't erase hunger or fear, but the cloak is something to grip when nothing else shields you. It becomes a boundary, a line between your body and the pitiless night. Without it, you would feel naked not just to the cold but to despair itself. Somewhere in the camp, a voice recites a psalm, the words muffled but steady. The rhythm blends with the rustle of cloaks, the shuffling of feet, the groan of canvas walls. It is strange how these sounds become lullabies of survival. They soothe in their own rough way, just as the wool soothes despite its itch. One peculiar detail from Chronicles. In extreme cold, men sometimes dipped their cloaks in water, then let them freeze stiff around their bodies, claiming the rigid shell-blocked wind better than loose fabric. It sounds absurd, almost painful, yet you can picture the experiment born from desperation. Whether it worked or not, it shows the lengths to which soldiers would go when winter pressed hardest. The hours crawl on. Each shift of your cloak feels like a negotiation with the elements. Pull tighter, leave a gap, cover the head, free the feet. And all around you, other men are doing the same. Silent dancers in a choreography of cold. You drift in and out of drowsiness, the wool scratching, the warmth fleeting, but the knowledge that the cloak still holds you together makes sleep possible at all. The smell of stew drifts faintly through the camp, and your stomach clenches even before your mind registers it. Somewhere nearby, soldiers crouch around a blackened pot, stirring with spoons carved from wood. The broth is thin, greasy, and suspiciously dark, but in this cold, it might as well be a royal feast. Food was warmth, not only in spirit but in body. A hot meal could push back the night better than another layer of straw ever could. Contemporary records describe rations that sound meagre to modern ears: salted pork, dried peas, onions, black bread, so hard it might double as a weapon. Yet these were lifelines. Boiled together in pots, they became what soldiers often called pottage, a mash that filled bellies and, more importantly, stoked inner fires. Chroniclers noted how soldiers ate quickly, often while still on guard, steam rising from bowls into air that froze it almost instantly. A curious superstition clung to these meals. Some men believed that meat cooked until nearly rotten carried extra strength, as though enduring decay made it more potent. It may sound revolting, but desperation breeds odd comforts. One soldier claimed in a letter home that he feared the stew that lacked stink, for then it lacked power. Perhaps he was joking, or perhaps hunger warped humor into survival. Researchers continue to question just how nutritious such fare truly was. Did these greasy, boiled-down concoctions really provide enough energy for men marching miles through snow? Some argue yes, pointing to the heavy fat content. Others doubt it, citing frequent illness and exhaustion noted in records. The truth probably lies somewhere between, enough to limp on, but not enough to thrive. The stew pot bubbles, spitting fat into the flames. Men pass wooden cups, scooping portions, blowing across them to cool before swallowing. The steam fogs their faces, giving them ghostly auras in the dim firelight. You taste it salty, metallic, Overwhelming, but warmth spreads down your throat, and suddenly the night feels less cruel. The food clings to your ribs, heavier than the thin cloak could ever manage. One man jokes that if the enemy smelled their cooking, they'd retreat without a fight. Another mutters that the stew tastes like the inside of a boot, but still he gulps it down. Laughter ripples, weak but real. You realize that in a place where every breath bites with frost, even foul food becomes a blessing. Occasionally, soldiers improvised with what they found: roots dug hastily from frozen fields, scraps of horse meat, or even foraged mushrooms. One quirky detail passed among ranks was that boiling leather straps into broth could stave off starvation for a night. Whether myth or reality, you can imagine men chewing softened leather in flickering firelight, trying to pretend it was meat. The smell of the stew lingers, sharp and sour, mingling with smoke and damp wool. Yet it grounds the senses. It says, "You are alive, and you have eaten, and that is enough for tonight." Hunger may return tomorrow, but for these hours, your body glows faintly from within. As you finish your portion, you feel the weight of fatigue deepen. The camp grows quieter. Men lying back on cloaks and straw, bellies warmed, spirits dulled. Food has done what it always does. It has softened the edges of misery, turning the battlefield into something almost domestic. For a brief moment, you can almost believe you are not at war at all. You find yourself outside again, the tent flap pushed aside, and the shock of cold air cuts sharper now that your belly holds warmth. Across the camp, shadows stretch long around dwindling fires. Not everyone is lucky enough to sleep tonight. Some men draw the short straw and take their turn as sentries. Guard shifts in the cold are perhaps the cruelest test of endurance. Contemporary accounts stress how vital these night watches were. Without them, surprise raids could devastate entire armies before dawn. At Crécy, chroniclers describe English archers posted through the night, stamping their feet in the frost while their comrades snored. A sleeping camp was a vulnerable camp, and commanders knew it. Yet they also knew the misery these men faced. Eyelids heavy, fingers stiff, minds wandering as the hours stretched endlessly. One peculiar belief whispered among soldiers was that whistling during guard duty invited evil spirits, or worse, drew enemy arrows. So, sentries often stood in absolute silence, mouths clamped shut, relying only on gestures or quiet taps to communicate. Imagine the eerie quiet of dozens of men staring outward, watching the dark, while a whole army slumbered behind them. Scholars remain divided on whether watch rotations were strictly enforced or left to soldiers' initiative. Some sources suggest commanders punished neglect with death, even for nodding off. Others argue that in smaller forces, men trusted each other more loosely, taking turns in a rhythm born of fatigue rather than strict orders. Either way, the risk was real. A single careless moment could doom thousands. You walk toward a sentry at the edge of camp. His outline is sharp in the torchlight, but his breath clouds white with every exhale. He shifts from foot to foot, boots crunching on frost. His spear leans against his shoulder, fingers tapping the shaft in a futile attempt at warmth. You see him blink long and hard, fighting sleep. The silence is thick, broken only by distant creaks of wood, the occasional stamp of a horse, or the mournful howl of a wolf echoing from some unseen hill. To stay awake, some men chewed leather straps, biting down until their jaws ached. Others rubbed snow on their faces, a shock to the senses that left skin burning. A few even jabbed themselves with knife points, small nicks on the thigh to jolt the body with pain. Cruel methods, but better than drifting into dreams where the enemy could slip unseen through the dark. The sentry beside you mutters a prayer under his breath, a rhythm that doubles as both devotion and distraction. He shifts his grip on the spear, eyes sweeping the horizon. The land beyond the camp is a blur of shadows, the moon only a faint smear behind clouds. Every movement, every rustle, could be the wind or something worse. Fear and cold blur together until they feel the same. Oddly, some soldiers reported preferring guard duty. despite the cold. They claimed the solitude gave them peace, a moment away from the crowded tents and stench of unwashed men. One diary even mentions a guard describing the night as a cathedral of frost, where silence was the sermon. Romantic, yes, but perhaps it captures the strange clarity of standing alone in the freezing dark. The hours drag. You stamp your feet like the others, shake your arms, try to keep circulation flowing. Every second feels stretched, and yet you know dawn will come eventually. Behind you, the camp murmurs in uneasy sleep, trusting these scattered figures at its edges. Ahead, the dark looms, indifferent and endless. And so, the guard's task becomes more than watching for enemies. It is also a battle against himself, against drowsiness, against despair, against the creeping suspicion that nothing lies out there at all. But he endures, as all soldiers must, for in the cold of a medieval night, vigilance was as essential as fire. The cold gnaws deeper as the hours crawl, but the camp finds one more tool to dull its bite: ale and wine. You watch as soldiers gather around a barrel, dipping wooden cups or hollowed horns into the dark liquid. The drink splashes and foams, sharp with sourness, but no one complains. In this bitter night, warmth from within matters more than taste. Chroniclers of the 100 Years' War often mention barrels of ale rolling along with supply trains, treated with as much reverence as sacks of flour. Commanders knew full well that spirits kept men from collapsing in misery. Ale filled bellies with liquid calories, wine lifted morale, and both dulled the edge of cold. One account from a Burgundian force even notes that rations were measured more carefully than arrows, a telling priority in the harsh months of campaign. There was also a curious belief whispered among ranks that drinking wine before sleep guaranteed dreams of victory. Some claimed it coaxed visions of saints or angels. Others said it drew out darker omens. A few even boasted that strong ale worked better than fur, warming the blood more reliably than any cloak. Whether exaggeration or truth, you see how men clung to the idea. Drink enough, and perhaps the cold would seem like nothing more than a distant memory. Modern scholars are still uncertain about just how effective alcohol was in such conditions. Some argue it gave dangerous illusions of warmth, relaxing the body even as it lost heat faster. Others counter that in moderation, it provided calories and numbed pain, making it at least a short-term aid. The debate remains unsettled, but the fact is clear. Soldiers turn to drink as surely as they turn to fire. You take a sip, and the burn travels down your throat into your chest, spreading like a small torch inside you. The sensation is fleeting, but it brings a sigh of relief. Around you, laughter rises louder now, a little looser. Men joke about past battles, about women waiting in distant villages, about commanders who snore louder than war drums. The drink blurs edges, softens fear, and in its haze, camaraderie flourishes. Of course, excess had its price. There are tales of men drinking so heavily they missed their watch, waking only to find punishment waiting. Others staggered out of tents and froze in ditches before dawn. Yet these warnings rarely deterred the desperate. Cold presses harder than discipline, and the bottle's promise glowed brighter than reason. You glance at one group where a soldier pours wine into a shared cup, each man taking a turn before passing it on. Their faces are flushed, steam rising as breath mixes with laughter. Someone strums a lute string, badly out of tune, but no one minds. Music and drink fold together, wrapping the camp in a brief illusion of festivity. An old veteran leans toward you, whispering that he once heard of men mixing spices into their wine, pepper, cinnamon, even mustard, claiming it chased away the frost better than plain drink. Whether truth or tall tale, you imagine the fiery concoction burning like a forge in the belly. The idea itself makes you warmer. The camp grows hazier as mugs empty. Men slump back onto straw, cheeks flushed, sighing with contentment. For some, the alcohol buys a few hours of heavy, dreamless sleep. For others, it coaxes vivid visions, saints marching with swords of flame, or enemies vanishing like mist. You see their expressions twitch, their lips mutter in slumber. Drink has opened doors they cannot close until morning. And so you understand, in these medieval camps, ale and wine were not luxuries. They were medicine, shield and solace, poured into weary bodies like liquid fire. Against the relentless cold, soldiers raised their cups, not in celebration but in defiance. You duck back into the canvas shelter, and the air inside is dense, heavy with a haze that makes your eyes sting. A brazier glows faintly in the corner, little more than a clay bowl filled with coals, its embers pulsing red. Smoke curls upward, hesitates, and then spreads in sluggish ribbons through the tent. The warmth is real, but so is the danger. Contemporary records note that small braziers and makeshift fire pits were sometimes carried into tents during bitter nights. They gave soldiers a pocket of heat, enough to take the edge off frost. Chroniclers wrote of men huddling around them until their faces flushed and their backs froze. Yet there are also accounts of camps lost to fire when sparks caught the cloth walls, the blaze racing faster than anyone could escape. Comfort and catastrophe balanced on a knife's edge. An odd rumor circled among soldiers that sleeping in smoke itself hardened the lungs, making men more resistant to illness. Others swore that the fumes drove away evil spirits. You cough gently and feel your throat scratch raw. Whether superstition or not, the belief shows how men justified what they endured. To them, the suffocating haze was not a hazard, it was another shield, invisible but present. Historians still puzzle over how widespread this practice truly was. Some argue that braziers were common, especially in wealthier armies with access to clay pots. Others suggest they were rare luxuries, too dangerous and too costly for ordinary soldiers. The evidence is scattered, leaving the question suspended between likelihood and myth. Inside this tent, the brazier becomes the tent's fragile heart. The glow flickers against canvas walls, painting them with shadows that shift and stretch like restless ghosts. You feel heat on your shins, almost scalding, but your back remains chilled. Soldiers here learn the rhythm of turning slowly, presenting each side of their body to the coals until warmth cycles through their limbs. They look like meat roasting on invisible spits, bodies rotating in silence. The smell is thick burning wood mixed with damp wool and sweat. Your eyes water, and you notice others wiping tears unconsciously, as though grief has seeped into the air. Yet no one moves the brazier. They accept the discomfort because the alternative is worse. Cold is merciless, smoke is tolerable. One soldier mutters that the fire demons must be appeased, tossing a scrap of bread crust into the coals. Another grins, swearing that the crackle that follows is proof the spirits are satisfied. Superstition again, but you sense how these rituals comfort men. When you live on the knife's edge of frost, every small act feels like insurance. Occasionally, soldiers doze too close, their cloaks smouldering before they wake with a yelp. You catch the acrid scent of singed wool and hear laughter that hides nerves. Fire keeps you alive, but it never forgets its own hunger. The brazier hums, faint but steady, as though it breathes with you. Outside, the wind howls, battering the tent walls. Inside, the smoke presses heavier, settling into every fold of cloth, every hair and pore. You lie down, blinking against the sting, and pull your cloak higher. Despite the sting in your throat, warmth seeps into your bones and your body slackens. And so, half asleep, you realize the strange truth. Soldiers often chose between choking on smoke or freezing to death. Tonight, you understand why many chose smoke. For at least in that haze, the body could surrender to sleep without shivering itself awake. You stumble toward the edge of the camp, where horses are tethered, their breath puffing clouds in the dark like chimneys. The air here is thicker, pungent with hay, manure, and the musky smell of sweat-soaked hides. It may not be pleasant, but in a world of icy winds, warmth is warmth, and the soldiers know it. They spread cloaks on the ground near the animals, curling up close enough to feel the heat radiating from the beasts' flanks. Contemporary records describe this practice without surprise. Men slept near their mounts during sieges and marches, treating them as both companions and heaters. Horses were wealth on legs too valuable to be left unattended. Guarding them while stealing warmth was simply efficient. Accounts from campaigns in Eastern Europe speak of men waking with their cloaks stiff from frost, yet their faces flushed from the heat of the animals pressed against them. A curious tidbit floats among the soldiers. Some claimed that sleeping close to horses gave them stronger dreams, filled with visions of speed and power. Others even believed that inhaling the steam of a horse's breath could keep frostbite at bay. Odd ideas perhaps, but in the half-light of a freezing camp, imagination warms where wool fails. Specialists remain uncertain how widespread this habit was. Some argue it was common only among cavalry, who were bonded to their mounts. Others suggest even infantry sought out animal company, oxen, mules, or even pigs whenever possible. Archaeological evidence is thin, leaving the matter unsettled. But the stories persist, woven into chronicles and songs of men who swore that a horse saved them from death more than once. You ease closer, and the horse beside you shifts, stamping once before settling again. Its flank radiates heat, a steady furnace masked by damp hair. You press a hand against its side, and feel the slow rise and fall of its breath. The rhythm is calming, almost hypnotic. Other soldiers murmur nearby, already half asleep, their bodies nestled between hay and hooves. The animals snort occasionally, the sound startling but familiar. The smell is unavoidable, acrid and thick, but you notice how the soldiers don't flinch. To them, it means life. Better to reek of manure and survive than to smell clean and freeze. One veteran nearby chuckles that he once shared a blanket with a mule and never slept warmer. The younger recruits grimace, but you can see their envy. You watch a soldier drape his cloak over both himself and his horse's neck, as though cloaking them together against the night. He whispers into the animal's ear, words you cannot catch. Perhaps it is a prayer, perhaps gratitude. Bonds forged in battle stretched beyond men. Beasts too were companions in suffering. An old story rises in memory of Cossacks who claimed a man could survive nights on the steppe only by lying beneath his horse, the animal's body sheltering him like a tent. Whether exaggerated or not, the image fits here, where men lean into their mounts as though they were family. As you curl up in the hay, the heat is undeniable. The soundscape is different from the tents here. It is snorts, chewing, the rhythmic swish of tails. It feels strangely peaceful, a barn transplanted into war. Your body relaxes in the animal warmth, even as the stink clings to your cloak. And so you realize, in these frozen camps, survival blurred the lines between man and beast. Horses were not just transport, not just instruments of war. They were living furnaces, guardians of warmth, companions against the endless cold. The night stretches on, and when at last a grey sliver of dawn pushes against the horizon, the camp stirs to misery. You push yourself upright, cloak stiff with frost, and the first thing you notice is your boots. They are no longer pliant leather but frozen shells, stiff as wood. Soldiers curse under their breath as they wrestle their feet into them, stamping hard until cracks spread across the stiffened surface. Contemporary reports highlight this constant struggle. Shoes and boots soaked by snow and mud during the day would freeze solid overnight. Men woke to footwear so rigid they had to soften it by the fire, risking burns to leather and skin alike. Chroniclers from the Baltic campaigns note that some soldiers carried boots inside their cloaks while they slept, hugging them to keep them warm against their chests. An awkward solution, but less cruel than shoving numb toes into ice. A curious rumor persisted among some armies, that urinating into boots before dawn was a secret way to thaw them. The warmth worked, yes, but the result was unbearable stench. Still, desperate men chose humiliation over frostbite. It sounds absurd to you now, but in a frozen camp where every toe mattered, dignity often gave way to survival. Scholars remain divided on whether frostbite was a common cause of attrition or a more modern exaggeration. Some records mention soldiers losing toes and fingers regularly. Others are oddly silent, suggesting commanders did not always deem such losses worth noting. The truth likely lies between silence and screams. Archaeology has uncovered bones with evidence of amputations, though whether caused by battle or frost is uncertain. You watch men stamping their feet, trying to force life into them. The sound is rhythmic. Thud, 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 a chorus of boots against earth. Some rub their feet fiercely. Others beg comrades to help tug on stiff leather. The smell of scorched hide drifts from fires where boots are held too close, blackening in the flames. A few unlucky ones discover splits in the soles, icy mud waiting to seep in once the march resumes. The misery leaks into voices. A man mutters that he'd rather march barefoot than wear these frozen coffins. Another scoffs, warning that bare feet would blacken by noon. A third shrugs, saying at least the enemy's steel would be kinder than this frost. Their gallows humor masks real fear. You glance at their faces, lips cracked, noses red, eyes heavy with exhaustion. The boots are just another weapon the winter wields against them. Odd little tricks circulate. Some men stuffed straw into their footwear to trap heat. Others lined boots with scraps of wool or animal fat, believing grease slowed the frost. One even claims to have tucked hot coals inside for a moment before slipping his feet in. The burns on his toes prove that trick's folly, but desperation breeds experiments. As the camp begins to wake fully, the frozen boot ritual repeats everywhere, soldiers hopping on one foot, tugging straps, stamping until the leather softens slightly. Horses snort impatiently, sensing movement. Commanders shout for haste, though they too struggle with stiff riding boots. The morning is a symphony of curses, laughter, and the dull percussion of leather meeting earth. You wiggle your toes inside your own pair, numb, but still there. Relief washes over you, for in this camp, keeping your boots, keeping your feet, means keeping your life. And so, with every painful stomp, soldiers remind themselves, the cold will not win, not today. Even if the boots feel like prisons, they are the only barrier left between flesh and frost. As the camp quiets again, you notice another kind of movement, tiny shapes, skittering through the straw, slipping beneath cloaks, darting toward the leftover crumbs near the brazier. Rats. You hear them before you see them, their claws scratching faintly on wood and canvas, their bodies rustling through bedding. Soldiers groan, swat at them half-heartedly. But the vermin are as much a part of the camp as the men themselves. Accounts from medieval sieges often mention swarms of rodents thriving in winter camps. Food was scarce, but scraps were inevitable, and the warmth of bodies drew vermin like a beacon. Chroniclers described men waking to find gnawed bread, chewed bootstraps, and even rats tugging at cloaks in search of crumbs. Rodents carried disease, yes, but they also represented one more discomfort in nights already heavy with frost. There was a curious superstition that rats stole not just food but heat. Soldiers swore the creatures crept into blankets, soaking up warmth before darting away. Some even claimed that if you woke cold in the night, it meant a rat had stolen your warmth away. You smirk at the absurdity, but lying here, feeling the faint twitch of movement near your feet, you understand how easily such beliefs took root. Experts still debate whether rodent infestations were worse in winter or summer. Some argue that cold drove vermin closer to humans, while others insist that disease outbreaks were more frequent in the heat. The archaeological record is thin, though gnawed remains of leather gear suggest rats never respected the seasons. One soldier beside you growls, hurling a stone at the corner where a pair of glowing eyes vanish. Another curses when he finds holes chewed through his pack. A third, oddly amused, claims rats are good omens. They stay where warmth remains, he says. So if they sleep with us, the fire has not gone out. The others laugh bitterly. But you sense the truth hidden in the jest. Even vermin could be twisted into symbols of endurance. You lie back and listen to the chorus of sounds, the crackle of embers, the sigh of wind through canvas, and the constant, subtle scratching of tiny claws. It is maddening, yes, but it is also oddly soothing, a background hum that proves life still exists in the frozen night. The rats are survivors too, thriving where men struggle. Perhaps their persistence mirrored the soldiers' own. One quirky method surfaces: men sometimes set traps with hardened cheese rinds, but more often they simply let dogs loose among the tents. Puppies brought from villages served dual roles: companions and rat hunters. Soldiers even tied bells to their collars, the jingling a sign that another thief had been caught. Yet, despite these efforts, the rats always returned. The mingled smells of smoke, sweat, and straw are now pierced by the sharper scent of rodents, musky and sour. It clings to the air, a reminder that no camp was ever clean, no night ever free from intrusion. You imagine trying to sleep while whiskers brush your cheek or claws scuttle across your chest. Soldiers must have grown used to it or pretended to. As you shift your cloak tighter, you hear squeaks fade into the distance, replaced by the steady rhythm of breathing men. Oddly enough, the camp feels almost alive because of it, a tangled ecosystem of soldiers, animals, and vermin, all huddling against the same relentless cold. And so you realize, even in the depths of a medieval winter camp, survival wasn't a solitary battle. It was shared not only with comrades but with creatures that thrived in the shadows, stealing crumbs, stealing warmth, yet reminding men that life, in its many forms, always found a way to persist. The cold is sharp, but from somewhere in the camp rises a softer sound song. At first it is faint, just a single voice humming into the dark, but soon others join. The melody wavers, cracked by exhaustion and chill, yet it carries warmth that even fire cannot provide. Soldiers settle closer to the embers, their faces shadowed, their voices weaving into one. Contemporary accounts make it clear that music was a constant companion in medieval armies. Chroniclers wrote of marching songs, bawdy tavern tunes reshaped for campfires, and ballads of saints and heroes murmured before sleep. One source from the Burgundian Wars describes soldiers singing quietly in chorus, so that the night might pass less bitter. The words often changed, but the act itself remained constant song as survival. An odd tradition appeared in some ranks. Singing in low voices was believed to confuse spirits wandering at night, as if music masked the scent of living men. Others whispered that harmonizing together lulled not only comrades but the very air, softening the bite of the wind. Superstition or not, the sound of many voices rising in the dark had its own undeniable power. Modern researchers disagree on whether soldiers composed entirely new songs during campaigns or simply recycled old folk tunes. Some argue that the harsh rhythm of marching and the monotony of camp bred unique verses. Others believe most songs were borrowed from home, comfort carried in melody rather than invention. Evidence remains scarce, leaving the debate unresolved. The singing tonight shifts between humor and sorrow. One verse mocks a commander's clumsy horse, another remembers a girl left behind in a far-off village. Laughter ripples at the jokes, then fades into sighs at the memories. You realize that each note is a thread binding men together, stitching courage from shared breath. The fire cracks, throwing sparks into the dark. Voices rise louder, bolder now. The sound cuts through the howling wind, and for a moment the camp transforms. You no longer hear shivering or coughing, you hear harmony. The music fills the cold spaces that blankets and cloaks cannot. A soldier near you pulls out a battered flute, its notes thin but clear. The tune is clumsy, yet the men cheer. Another taps rhythm on a shield, turning iron into drum. It is not skillful, but it is human, and it keeps despair at bay. The smell of smoke and damp wool blends strangely with this music, creating an atmosphere halfway between church and tavern. You close your eyes and listen. The voices carry images: fields of spring flowers, feasts in warm halls, children laughing at midsummer fairs. Song transforms the camp, at least in memory. And when the last note fades, the silence it leaves is almost sacred. The men settle back onto straw, heads bowed, breath easing. The night is no warmer, but it feels less hostile. Music has done its quiet work. And so you realize, in medieval battle camps, songs were not just entertainment. They were blankets woven of sound, wrapping weary men in the illusion of warmth and the comfort of home. Against the merciless cold, melody became another kind of fire. The fire dies lower, the songs fade, and soon only the sound of men shifting in uneasy sleep remains. You lie among them, listening to the occasional snore, a muffled cough, the creak of leather straps as someone rolls over. But rest here is not peaceful. Dreams are jagged, twisted by memory and fear. Soldiers thrash, mutter, sometimes cry out. The cold is not the only enemy of sleep. The mind itself wages war in the dark. Chroniclers of medieval campaigns mention this often in passing. Men would wake trembling, shouting about battles that had not yet happened, or visions of foes already slain. One English scribe noted that the ground was alive with nightmares, each man wrestling shadows in his sleep. Such descriptions reveal how exhaustion, hunger, and terror bled into the few hours when bodies sought rest. Among soldiers, a peculiar belief grew that nightmares were warnings, omens sent by saints or demons. Some swore that dreaming of falling swords meant death the next day. Others claimed visions of fire promised victory. You hear one man mutter in his sleep, fists clenched as though gripping a phantom blade. His comrade nudges him gently, whispering, "Peace, brother, it is only a dream." Yet both men know the weight of those dreams will linger come dawn. Modern scholars are still unsure how to interpret these restless nights. Were nightmares simply the natural result of trauma and cold, or did soldiers genuinely see them as supernatural messages? Some argue that medieval belief systems left no boundary between body, mind, and spirit. Dreams were as real as waking. Others caution against romanticizing, suggesting men were simply plagued by fevers, poor food, and icy ground. The truth, as usual, may lie between. You close your eyes and drift too, and soon the cold slips away. In its place comes the clang of steel, the shriek of horses, the endless roar of war drums. Even here, safe in story, you feel how easily the brain replays terror. A man beside you jerks awake with a strangled cry, panting as though he's been running. He rubs his face, mutters a prayer, then curls back down into the straw, cloak tight, seeking sleep again. One odd practice emerges among these nights. Men sometimes exchanged amulets or talismans before sleeping, convinced that carrying a holy relic or even a pebble blessed by a priest kept dreams at bay. Others swore by sleeping with a dagger beneath the cloak, blade facing outward, as if the mere presence of steel kept spirits away. Whether effective or not, the ritual gave them a sense of control. The tent fills with small noises of unrest, teeth chattering, limbs twitching, sudden gasps. It is as if the whole camp breathes in fragments, never fully at peace. Yet the strange thing is, even nightmares serve a function. They exhaust the mind, burning out anxiety, leaving men too drained to resist sleep again. By morning, most barely recall what visions haunted them. You shift on the straw, your body aching but still drawn into uneasy dreams. Around you, the camp mutters in its collective slumber, a chorus of restless souls. The night is cruel, but somehow, despite the fear and the shadows, soldiers still wake alive at dawn, and that is all that matters. The night is deep, and a faint bell tolls in the distance. A figure moves slowly among the tents, robes brushing the frosted ground, voice low in Latin prayer. A priest. His presence is quiet but deliberate, blessing the shelters, sprinkling a few drops of holy water onto canvas walls, whispering words that blend with the crackle of dying fires. For soldiers, faith was as much a shield as steel or wool. Chroniclers recorded that clergy often travelled with armies, tending both to the sick and the fearful. They were there not only for mass at dawn, but for the long, dreadful nights when men wondered if they'd survive till morning. One French account describes a priest pacing camp with a lantern, murmuring psalms over sleeping soldiers, so that the cold of night might not be joined by the chill of the devil. Religion wrapped itself around every moment, even the act of sleep. There was a curious belief that a tent blessed by holy water was warmer, as if sanctity itself warded off frost. Some swore they felt the difference immediately, that prayers stitched invisible walls thicker than cloth. Skeptics, of course, mocked the notion. But when you're shivering in the dark, what harm is there in hoping the divine will share its warmth? Academics still debate the role of priests in daily camp life. Some argue their influence was limited, confined to rituals before battle. Others insist they were woven into the rhythms of survival, offering solace during long campaigns when morale faltered. The evidence is scattered, found in snippets of letters and sermons, leaving room for interpretation. You watch the priest stop by a tent, raising his hand in blessing while the soldiers inside murmur their thanks. The glow of his lantern throws gentle light over rough faces, transforming hardened men into something childlike, just for a moment. The sound of prayer softens the camp, as though faith itself hushes the wind. Inside one tent, a group recites the Lord's Prayer together before lying down, their voices low and steady. The rhythm becomes a lullaby, soothing even those who only half believe. For others, prayer is more personal. A soldier clutches a wooden cross, fingers tracing its grooves until his breathing evens. Another whispers a plea to Saint Martin, patron of soldiers, asking for warmth and safety. You realize that for many, faith was the last line of defense when cloaks, fires, and comradeship failed. An unusual ritual surfaces. Some men drew chalk crosses on their boots or blades before sleeping, believing it would keep frost and enemies alike at bay. Others tied small relics, bits of cloth, saint medals, even bones to their cloaks. Whether true protection or not, these tokens gave them the courage to close their eyes in a world where danger never slept. The camp is quieter now, the murmurs of prayer fading into silence. The priest walks on, lantern bobbing, until he disappears into the night. Yet his presence lingers. The soldiers seem calmer, their breathing steadier, as though the words left behind a blanket of peace. You lie back, eyes half closed, and feel the weight of ritual settle into the camp. The cold is still sharp, the wind still cruel, but faith has created a kind of warmth that no fire could. And so you realize, in these medieval camps, survival depended not only on fire, straw, or cloaks, but on belief. A whispered blessing, a drop of water, a simple prayer, these were as real as any shield against the night. The priest's lantern fades into the dark, but the camp is not filled only with men of the sword and cross. Moving quietly between tents are figures with baskets, rolls of cloth, or bundles of food camp followers. These were the wives, children, traders, and wanderers who trailed armies across Europe. They were cooks, healers, washerwomen, merchants, and sometimes companions in less official senses. In the brutal cold, they brought more than supplies, they often brought extra warmth. Chroniclers rarely gave them much attention, yet their presence seeps into the margins of records. An account from the Hussite Wars mentions 100 women and boys who carried wood, fetched water, and spread bedding. Their role was rarely glorified, but without them, the camp's survival would have faltered. They were the invisible scaffolding, holding soldiers upright. A curious tale lingers of women sewing extra blankets from looted cloth, piecing together scraps of velvet, linen, and wool into patchwork quilts. Soldiers swore these made warmer bedding than any cloak, not because of their quality, but because of the care stitched into them. Whether true or imagined, the idea of warmth sewn by human hands gave hope to men drowning in frost. Historians remain divided on how dependent armies were on these followers. Some argue they were indispensable, feeding and clothing men when official supply lines collapsed. Others suggest commanders resented them, seeing mouths to feed and discipline undermined. Evidence points both ways, showing the tension between necessity and nuisance. Still, soldiers themselves rarely complained. On nights like this, A blanket passed from a follower's hands might be worth more than gold. You watch as a woman bends into a tent, spreading an extra fur across a group of young recruits. They sigh, their bodies relaxing instantly under the added weight. Another figure offers a steaming cup of broth to a man on watch, his numb fingers curling gratefully around it. The small gestures ripple through the camp, softening the edges of despair. The smells shift, broth rich with herbs, warm bread crusts carried in baskets, even a hint of lavender tucked into bedding. Against the stench of smoke, sweat, and manure, these scents are astonishing, reminders of homes left behind. They linger, creating islands of comfort in a sea of misery. An odd superstition whispers here too. Some soldiers believed that a blanket given by a woman carried luck, guarding the soldier not only from cold but also from enemy blades. You hear one man boast that he survived a skirmish because he wrapped himself in his lover's shawl. His comrades laugh, but they nod too, half believing. You notice how the camp followers themselves endure the same cold. Their cloaks are no thicker, their bedding no softer, yet they continue moving, carrying warmth from one place to another. The soldiers mutter thanks, some awkwardly, others with genuine tenderness. The boundary between warrior and civilian blurs in these exchanges, revealing the humanity that survives even here. As you curl back under your own cloak, the weight of an extra blanket across your shoulders changes everything. The straw no longer feels so biting, the drafts less cruel. It is astonishing how a single layer can transform a night from torment to tolerable. And so you realize, the warmth of medieval camps did not come only from fire or body heat. It came from the invisible hands of those who followed the quiet labor, the stitched blankets, the whispered comfort that kept men alive when steel and frost pressed too close. The night drags forward, and when you step outside the tent again, a new sound greets you, the hard, brittle crack of ice. Soldiers gather around water barrels, cursing as they strike the frozen lids with spear butts and daggers. What should be a simple drink has become another battle. The surface is sealed thick, the liquid trapped beneath like treasure locked in glass. Accounts from winter campaigns describe this frustration with weary detail. Men woke to find buckets and barrels turned solid, horses' troughs rimmed with jagged crystals. Chroniclers during the Northern Crusades noted that the men hacked at their drink as though it were enemy stone. Even the simplest act, slaking thirst, demanded effort and strength. One curious belief spread among soldiers that drinking icy water straight from cracked barrels stole the fire from the belly. Some swore it weakened the spirit, others feared it courted fever. A few insisted, oddly, that letting the ice melt naturally by fire made the water blessed, as if the transformation carried divine approval. Desperation made rituals out of necessity. Modern researchers disagree on whether frozen stores seriously hampered medieval armies. Some argue soldiers often melted snow when barrels froze, making the issue minor. Others contend that snow alone could not meet needs, especially for horses, and that frozen barrels represented real crises in long sieges. Excavations near old encampments have uncovered charred barrel staves, suggesting desperate attempts to break or burn containers open. You watch now as men hack at ice, shards flying into the air, glittering like broken glass under torchlight. Their hands are stiff, clumsy with cold, and every strike sounds more desperate than the last. When they finally break through, the water that gushes out is colder than stone, biting at their throats as they gulp. Yet they drink eagerly, even if they wince afterward. Thirst is its own enemy. Some try clever tricks. One soldier lowers hot stones from the fire into a bucket, steam rising in sudden clouds. Another stirs the surface with an iron blade, as though churning might soften it. A third simply smashes his mug through the crust, scooping ice shards like soup. Around them, laughter mingles with curses, a rough soundtrack to survival. The camp smells of wet wood now, water spilling over frozen ground, mixing with mud and ash. Horses neigh impatiently, their muzzles plunging into troughs, breaking ice with teeth. Steam rises from their nostrils as they drink, and the sound of lapping water fills the cold silence like music. One soldier mutters that the ice is punishment for sins, God freezing their drink as penance. Another claims it is proof that even nature serves the enemy, seeking to weaken them before battle. Belief twists around every obstacle, turning hardship into meaning. Perhaps that itself was a form of warmth. You crouch, cup a handful of the melted water, and sip. It stings, numbing your teeth, but refreshes too. You shiver, then smile at the contradiction something so bitter can still give life. That is the lesson of these camps. Survival is never sweet, but it is survival all the same. And so you understand. Frozen barrels were not just an inconvenience. They were a nightly reminder that winter itself was a foe to be fought, as relentless as any army. Each crack of ice, each gulp of freezing water, was proof that men endured battles even when no enemy stood before them. Snow begins to fall, soft at first, then thick and heavy, blanketing the camp in a muffled silence. The flakes catch in the firelight, swirling like pale sparks, settling on cloaks and tents until everything glows white. You'd think soldiers would curse it, but some smile faintly, for they know snow has its strange uses. It was not only an enemy, it could be a shield. Contemporary sources from northern campaigns describe an odd practice: banking snow around tents. Men shoveled drifts against canvas walls, piling them high as if constructing crude fortifications. The snow, packed tightly, acted as insulation, keeping wind from slipping inside and sometimes even trapping warmth. Chroniclers of the Teutonic Order mention soldiers joking that snow is the one ally who will not betray. It is strange to picture, but practical nature's misery turned into protection. A curious superstition took root among some troops, that sleeping under snow itself preserved life. They whispered stories of men who dug shallow pits, buried themselves beneath white blankets, and woke warmer than those left in the open. To outsiders it sounded like madness, yet in certain places it mirrored truth. Snow, dense and still, could insulate like fur. You try brushing your hand into a drift, and indeed the air beneath feels less biting than the wind above. Historians still dispute how often soldiers truly relied on snow as shelter. Some insist it was common in alpine passes, citing tales of men digging hollows like foxes. Others argue these stories are exaggerated, borrowed from peasant lore or even from Viking traditions. Archaeological evidence is scarce, leaving the question open to speculation. Still, the persistence of the tales suggests at least some truth. You watch now as soldiers scoop snow with shields, pressing it against tents, stomping it firm with boots. Their laughter rings oddly bright, perhaps because for once the cold provides aid instead of harm. The walls of white rise higher, sealing in flickers of firelight, making each tent a glowing mound in the dark. From a distance, the camp looks less like an army and more like a scattered village of snow lanterns. Inside one tent, the difference is immediate. Drafts weaken, the canvas stiffens, and the air feels less raw. The men sigh, their shoulders loosening. One boasts that his grandmother taught him this trick, recalling winters when farmers burrowed into haystacks or snowdrifts to ride out storms. Others nod, murmuring about home, about roofs weighed down with snow that somehow kept houses warmer within. For a moment, nostalgia takes the edge off frost. A soldier jokes that the snowbanks might trick the enemy into thinking the camp deserted, buried overnight. Another adds that if the enemy attacked, they'd waste arrows shooting at white mounds. The humor is clumsy, but it spreads, warming the air almost as much as the fire. The smell of the camp shifts to less smoke-dense, more crisp, as if the snow scrubs the air clean. You breathe deeply, lungs aching from the chill yet filled with freshness. It is not comfort, but it is clarity. And as you lie back on your straw bed, the snow muffling the outside world, the silence deepens, the wind fades, the crackle of fire softens, and you feel cocooned, almost safe. It is a strange irony that the very thing soldiers cursed on the march becomes their ally in sleep. And so you realize snow was not only a symbol of hardship. In the frozen heart of medieval battle camps, it sometimes became a blanket itself, cold to the touch, but strong enough to hold death at bay until morning. The silence of snow settles, but soldiers know the real battle is fought at the edges of their own bodies. Hands and feet, noses and ears, those fragile extremities suffer first. That is why you notice the simple garments pulled from packs, woolen caps tugged low over ears, mittens stitched from scraps of cloth, sometimes even socks cut from torn cloaks. These little protections look almost laughably humble, but in truth, they are the first defense against frostbite. Contemporary accounts often describe caps as near universal. Knights wore hoods under their helmets during the day, but at night those same hoods, lined with fur or padded linen, served as sleeping gear. Chroniclers remark that a man who keeps his head covered will live longer than one who keeps his sword sharp. The wisdom was blunt but sound. Warmth lost from the head was warmth gone forever. Among the ranks lingered a peculiar trick. Some soldiers stuffed mittens with chicken feathers or scraps of moss, believing it created pockets of insulation. Others rubbed their hands with animal fat, convinced it sealed out the cold. You imagine greasy fingers gripping a sword at dawn, sticky but spared from cracking. Strange solutions, yet often the strange ones endure. Modern experts are still uncertain how effective these simple garments were. Some argue wool alone, damp and threadbare, could not prevent frostbite in harsher climates. Others point to evidence from peasant life, where similar caps and mittens carried families through winters. Surviving textiles unearthed in graves suggest these accessories were widespread, though whether soldiers had consistent access to them remains debated. You watch men adjusting their caps, pulling fabric down until only eyes peek out. The wool is rough, itchy against skin, but the relief it brings is unmistakable. A soldier flexes his fingers inside mittens, blowing into them before settling down. Another uses a spare mitten as a pouch, filling it with embers to warm before slipping it back on. The smell of singed wool quickly fills the tent, but the grin on his face says it was worth it. The soundscape shifts, less coughing, fewer complaints, replaced by the muffled shuffling of fabric. Caps muffle voices, mittens dampen gestures, so even conversation feels softer, as though the camp has been wrapped in padding. You realize how these small garments not only insulated flesh, but dulled the raw edges of the night itself. A veteran tells a story of losing 2 fingers during a siege when he foolishly went without mittens. His voice carries no drama, just weary warning. The younger recruits listen, tugging their own hand wraps tighter. Fear, here, is education. One curious superstition floats through the tents, that knitting a cap with uneven stitches brought better luck, because imperfection tricked evil spirits into leaving the wearer alone. You picture crooked hats bobbing in firelight, symbols of both warmth and faith. You lie back, cap pulled over ears, mittens clenched beneath your chin. The itch of wool is sharp, but it anchors you, reminding you of warmth trapped within. You realize that in a camp where everything feels immense, the howling wind, the endless dark, sometimes the smallest things save you. And so you understand, caps and mittens were not luxuries. They were survival stitched in humble loops of yarn and scraps of cloth. Against the medieval winter, these tiny garments stood as quiet warriors, shielding the most vulnerable parts of the body from a merciless night. The snow outside glitters faintly under a waning moon, but here in the camp, the ground is not always trusted. Some soldiers, weary of wind slicing through canvas, choose a different solution. They burrow. With knives, with shields, even with bare hands, they dig shallow hollows in the earth, carving out dugouts where frost cannot cut so deeply. You follow them, crouching low, as they disappear into pits half covered with branches and cloth. Writings from the Baltic Crusades mention men scooping earth into mounds, then lying inside like foxes in dens. The soil, though cold, held warmth better than air. Chroniclers observed that The ground swallows the wind, and the man sleeps hidden. Not glamorous, perhaps, but effective. Buried in dirt, soldiers traded dampness for insulation. One peculiar tale lingers. Some men lined their dugouts with animal dung, believing it trapped heat like plaster. Disgusting, yes. But when faced with death by frost, a little filth seemed a small price. Letters from soldiers rarely boasted of bravery in battle, but some proudly described clever hiding places where they outwitted winter itself. Scholars remain uncertain about how widespread these improvised shelters were. Some argue they were common among poorly supplied armies, particularly in the north. Others suggest only the most desperate dug like moles, since effort alone could exhaust already weakened men. Archaeological digs occasionally uncover strange depressions in ancient campsites, shapes too neat to be natural fueling the debate. You step into one of these hollows, and the difference is startling. The wind muffles instantly, sound deadened by the earth walls. The smell of damp soil rises thick and rich, mingling with the faint sweetness of rotting leaves. The ground beneath you is softer than frozen straw, yielding slightly as you lower yourself. The chill is still there, but less vicious, muted by the earth's embrace. Soldiers inside tuck branches across the top, layering cloaks, straw, even spare shields to form crude roofs. Smoke from a tiny fire curls upward through cracks, vanishing into the night. The dugout glows faintly, a hidden ember in a sea of frost. You hear their voices low, hushed, reverent, almost as though this space is sacred. Perhaps, in a way, it island. One man recalls how peasants in his village dug root cellars to keep vegetables alive through winter. Another nods, saying the earth itself is a mother hard but protective. You sense how these beliefs transform cold dirt into comfort. Even in war, men drew on the wisdom of farmers and ancestors. A quirky habit emerges. Soldiers sometimes carved patterns into the dugout walls, scratching crosses, runes, or simple tally marks. Some said it kept spirits away, others said it was boredom. Either way, the etchings turned soil into a home, however brief. You lean back, earth pressing close on all sides. The silence here is profound, broken only by breathing and the occasional drip of melting frost. Outside, the wind howls. Inside, the dugout hums with stillness. You realize why men chose this, not because it was comfortable, but because it was survivable. And so you see, in medieval battle camps, men sometimes slept not above the earth but within it, trading the vast sky for narrow walls of soil. In those improvised dens, they learned what every creature knows, that warmth often lies beneath the surface, waiting for those willing to dig. You emerge from the dugout and wander further, where the snow lies trampled and the smell of iron still lingers. Here the camp bleeds into the battlefield itself. No tidy rows of tents, no straw to soften the ground, just churned mud, shattered shields, and the husks of war. When armies marched too fast or supply wagons lagged, soldiers bivouacked wherever they stood, even if that meant sleeping amid the remnants of slaughter. Chroniclers give chilling glimpses of this. After Agincourt, men collapsed onto fields still littered with bodies, too exhausted to care. They wrapped themselves in cloaks and lay among the dead, breathing the same frosted air that stiffened corpses beside them. The living and the fallen were bedfellows, one monk recorded grimly. War and winter made no distinction. A peculiar superstition crept into such nights, that lying beside a corpse lent warmth. Some soldiers believed the dead held heat for hours, and desperate men curled near them, whispering apologies or prayers. To modern ears it sounds grotesque, yet in that moment it was simply practical. Warmth mattered more than revulsion. Historians argue about how common this practice truly was. Some insist these tales were moral exaggerations penned by clerics horrified by soldiers' brutality. Others point to repeated accounts across different campaigns, suggesting that necessity forced such choices more often than we'd like to imagine. Archaeological digs, showing campsites littered with shallow graves, seem to lend weight to the darker stories. You kneel now, the ground cold and slick with half-frozen mud. Around you lie abandoned weapons, a dented helm, a splintered spear, a broken crossbow string stiff with frost. The silence here is heavier, broken only by crows and the wind. Soldiers curl on cloaks, heads resting on shields, bodies pressed together for warmth. Some mutter prayers, others sleep without sound, their exhaustion drowning even nightmares. The smell is unmistakable, metallic, earthy, sharp with decay. You pull your cloak tighter, but it cannot keep that scent out. You imagine the soldiers doing the same, hiding their faces against fabric, pretending the field is just another camp. In the dark, illusions help. One man tells a story of a comrade who refused to lie down on such ground, fearing ghosts would steal his soul. He sat upright all night, shivering until dawn, while the others slept warmer beside him. His stubbornness cost him his health, though his conscience remained clear. Belief, it seems, could kill as surely as cold. Around you, faint torchlight flickers. The flames cast jagged shadows over corpses, blurring the line between living and dead. You hear a soldier laugh hoarsely, saying the enemy keeps him company even in sleep. No one responds. Laughter, here, is a fragile mask. The night presses in, and you sense how the battlefield transforms into something uncanny. The ground feels alive with memories, with echoes of steel and screams. Yet fatigue overwhelms even dread. When a body aches enough, when cold gnaws deep enough, men close their eyes no matter what surrounds them. And so you realize, in medieval warfare, sleep was not always granted in safety. Sometimes it came on open fields, among corpses, with the stink of death as blanket and shield. In those moments, survival meant more than endurance. It meant surrendering to exhaustion, even when fear whispered that the ground itself was cursed. The battlefield fades behind you as you return toward the camp's edge. Torches gutter along the perimeter, their flames bending in the wind. They do more than light the night, they cast long, uneasy shadows. You stand beside one, and the flickering glow paints your form tall and thin across the frozen ground, as though you've become a wavering phantom. Around you, other shadows dance and lunge, grotesque in their movements, shaped by cloth and steel. Chroniclers often describe the eerie atmosphere of camps lit by torchlight. Some called it beautiful, a sea of trembling fire marking civilization's outpost against the wilderness. Others wrote of dread, saying the shadows reminded men of restless spirits. At Nicopolis, one scribe recorded, "The flames guarded us, but their children frightened us more than the enemy." Torches comforted and unsettled in equal measure. An odd belief held that torchlight could confuse demons wandering at night, making them mistake shadows for real soldiers. Men sometimes placed extra torches in empty corners of the camp, a trick to fool both spirits and human foes into thinking the force was larger. Whether superstition or strategy, the practice reveals how light became both weapon and ritual. Scholars debate how effective torchlines were as defense. Some argue they blinded attackers approaching from dark fields, while others suggest they made camps easier targets, visible for miles. Archaeological finds of charred stakes hint at deliberate arrangements, but no clear consensus exists. The flickering perimeter remains a mystery, half practical, half psychological. You walk along the boundary and feel how the torch's warmth fades quickly, leaving only smoke and the faint hiss of burning pitch. Yet the light is powerful. It transforms the night, turning strangers into silhouettes and companions into wraiths. The ground ripples with movement as flames bend, making even still men seem restless. One soldier nearby mutters that shadows predict fate. Long shadows mean long life, short ones mean death at dawn. Another spits, dismissing it, though he glances nervously at his own dark twin dancing beside him. You sense how belief mingled with fear, shaping even the simplest glow into omen. The smell of burning resin is sharp, clinging to cloaks and hair. Smoke stings your nostrils, but the sound of crackling wood comforts you. It drowns the silence of the frozen fields, replacing emptiness with rhythm. Even in their unease, soldiers are drawn to the light, gathering near torches as moths might, their faces golden against the night. You notice how some men deliberately sit where their shadows stretch far, pretending they are joined by phantom comrades. In their minds, the camp swells larger, stronger. The enemy, if watching from afar, might believe the same. Deception and comfort twine together in the flicker. As you finally turn away, your eyes burn from the glow, and the darkness beyond seems deeper, more absolute. But behind you, the torches stand, stubborn defiance against both frost and fear. And so you realize, torchlight was more than fire. It was sentinel, symbol, and superstition. In the restless hours of a medieval night, shadows became both guardians and ghosts, reminders that survival was never lit by certainty but by flames that always trembled in the wind. The torches burn low as night folds into its heaviest hours. Inside the tents, soldiers shift and groan, waking to joints stiff as timber. You feel it too, every bone creaks as if aged decades in a single night. Rising from straw is no small task. Muscles ache, knees resist, and fingers curl slowly back to life. Sleep in a medieval camp is less restoration, more brief surrender. Accounts from chroniclers make this plain. Men often recorded that soldiers woke as if broken on the rack, their bodies so sore they stumbled when they tried to stand. The ground, unforgiving through straw and cloaks, bent spines and stiffened joints. Marches that followed were agony before the first step was even taken. A night of cold adds 10 years to a man, one veteran wrote, grimly summing up the toll. A curious detail surfaces from letters. Some soldiers swore that cracking their knuckles or stretching until tendons popped was proof life had returned to frozen limbs. They described it proudly, as if the sound itself meant survival. You hear such noises now, popping joints, echoing like twigs snapping in a fire. Strange, but perhaps satisfying in the stillness. Specialists in medieval life remain uncertain how common long-term damage was from these conditions. Some argue arthritis and joint pain plagued veterans early, while others insist the constant physical activity toughened bodies against lasting harm. Skeletons uncovered from battle cemeteries show both resilience and wear, leaving scholars cautious about conclusions. Around you, soldiers groan awake, rubbing shoulders, stamping feet, rolling heads in stiff circles. A few curse softly, voices cracking in the cold. One jokes that his back feels like it belongs to a man twice his age. Another mutters that if the enemy doesn't kill him, the earth will. Laughter trickles through, weak but real, the humor that cushions misery. The smell of damp wool rises sharply as men tug on cloaks, heavy with night frost. Smoke lingers in the air, sharper now as dying fires are stoked back to life. Straw rustles as bodies shift, clinging to cloaks and hair. The soundscape is a slow awakening, groans, coughs, the scraping of metal as swords are gathered once more. Odd habits emerge. Some men slap their own thighs and arms to drive blood back through sluggish veins. Others rubbed snow on stiff joints, believing the shock restarted circulation. It seems counterintuitive, but perhaps the contrast jolted the body awake. One veteran even claimed that lying flat and letting another soldier walk across your back was the only cure. Painful, yes, but he swore by it. The camp, once quiet in slumber, becomes a chorus of stretching, stamping, and muttering prayers. The faces around you are pale, lips cracked, eyes ringed with shadows. Yet each man still rises. This is the miracle of endurance, not waking refreshed, but waking at all. You push yourself upright, feeling your own muscles groan like old wood. The frost clings to your cloak, brittle crystals catching torchlight. Each movement feels like a negotiation with your body, but slowly warmth creeps back. Stiffness eases into motion, exhaustion reshaped into readiness. And so you realize, mornings in medieval battle camps were not fresh beginnings. They were hard victories, proof that the men had survived one more night. To rise aching, joints frozen, was not weakness. It was defiance, the body insisting, however creakily, that it still lived. The camp stirs fully awake, yet not all find the strength to join the bustle. A few men crouch over scraps of parchment, quills trembling in their stiff fingers. By the glow of a torch or the fading embers of a brazier, they try to write letters home. The ink, however, resists them. Overnight it is clotted in the cold, frozen into sluggish lumps that refuse to flow. Contemporary accounts note this constant frustration. Monks accompanying armies wrote how soldiers begged them for help with correspondence, only for ink to congeal in the chill. In northern campaigns, men sometimes held small bottles of ink beneath their cloaks through the night, hoping body heat would preserve it. A letter delayed could mean weeks of silence, and silence gnawed at morale. A curious improvisation surfaces in records. Some men mixed wine into ink, claiming it kept the liquid from freezing. Others used soot and water fresh from the fire, scrawling in thick, smeared lines that barely resembled script. Odd though it sounds, these makeshift inks left behind shaky but enduring words, testament to the will to be heard across distance. Historians still dispute how literate the common soldier was in medieval Europe. Some insist only a handful could write, relying on clerks or priests to compose letters. Others argue literacy spread more widely through towns and guilds, meaning many soldiers could at least scratch their names. The archaeological record of graffiti on walls, shields, and even bones complicates the picture. The debate, like the ink, remains unresolved. You lean closer, watching a young recruit struggle. His quill scratches weakly, letters breaking where ink freezes mid-stroke. He blows on the page, breath misting in the air, but the words blur regardless. Across from him, another soldier curses softly, shaking a hardened inkwell before throwing it aside. Frustration is sharp, but determination sharper. They keep trying. The smell of damp parchment and burning resin mingles oddly with smoke. You imagine how these letters carried warmth of their own, news from wives, prayers from mothers, promises from sweethearts. Writing was a way to survive the night not only in body, but in spirit. The frozen ink, in its stubborn refusal, threatened more than words. It threatened connection itself. One veteran laughs hoarsely, saying he once carved a letter into wood when ink failed, then sent the plank home by courier. His comrades chuckle, though the story carries truth. When the heart demanded expression, even frozen nights could not silence it. You look again at the trembling hands, the faint scratches on parchment, and the determination in tired eyes. It is not poetry, not eloquence, but it is love, fear, and hope captured in crooked lines. And so you realize, frozen ink was more than an inconvenience. It symbolized how winter war silenced voices, muffling bonds that stretched across miles. Yet even when words cracked and smudged, men found ways to send themselves home, if only on scraps that outlived the frost. The camp hums with weary motion, yet one corner catches your eye. A pile of hides, rough and heavy, spread across the straw. Soldiers crowd there eagerly, tugging at scraps of fur as if drawing lots. These are not elegant garments cut by tailors, but crude animal skins, trophies from raids, spoils from hunts, or traded goods scavenged from villages. In a world where wool cloaks and canvas tents often failed, furs were priceless currency. Contemporary records from winter campaigns emphasize this hierarchy of warmth. Nobles slept under fox or sable, sometimes layering several pelts together, while common soldiers fought over coarse sheepskin or goat hides. One Burgundian source grumbles that fur kept lords as kings by night, while peasants froze as servants. Yet when fortune allowed, even a strip of hide could transform misery into comfort. A curious tidbit survives in soldiers' lore. Some swore that sleeping under horsehide gave strength, the spirit of the beast passing into the man. Others believed wolf pelts carried protection against fear itself, a reminder that if wolves survived the wild, so could they. You run your hand over the stiff edge of a hide, and it smells faintly of smoke and musk, the animal lingering long after its death. Historians still discuss how common such furs truly were in military camps. Some argue they were rare luxuries, reserved for knights and officers. Others note accounts of raids specifically targeting livestock for hides, suggesting they filtered down to ordinary men more than once. Archaeological finds of cut animal skins near encampments hint at their regular use, though the scale remains uncertain. You crouch beside a group of soldiers arranging their bedding. They spread a cowhide across the ground, its weight flattening the straw. Then they crawl beneath a bearskin cloak, pulling it tight across shoulders. Immediately the air inside the cocoon shifts, less biting, more tolerable. The men sigh in relief, their breath clouding the fur above them. One whispers that the hide is warmer than his wife's embrace. Laughter ripples, small but genuine. The soundscape is different here, less groaning, fewer coughs. The furs smother noise as much as they trap warmth. You hear the soft rasp of fur against wool, the quiet shuffle of men tucking edges beneath bodies. The tent smells of lanolin, leather, and damp hair, strange but oddly comforting compared to smoke and sweat alone. An odd custom is mentioned in one chronicle. Some soldiers stitched coins or charms into hides, believing the metal drew luck or warmth. Others left bits of straw or herbs inside, convinced it kept vermin away. Whether superstition or practicality, these gestures turned skins into talismans as much as bedding. One man near you boasts he once stripped a boar in the forest and slept inside the skin itself. The younger recruits gag at the idea, but his grin says it worked. Another nods, recalling hunters in his village who did the same. It may sound grotesque, but survival has little patience for elegance. You lie back on a sheepskin, the coarse wool prickling but undeniably warmer than straw. The weight of the hide presses heavy, anchoring you, making the cold outside feel like a distant threat. The fire crackles faintly beyond the canvas. But here in the fur's embrace, you realize how precious such spoils must have been. And so you understand. Animal hides were more than plunder. They were lifelines, warmth harvested from the wild or from war itself. In medieval camps, they blurred the line between hunter and hunted, turning beasts into allies long after their breath had faded into the frost. The camp grows quieter, though not calmer. A new unease stirs as men grumble about the filth creeping into every corner. Straw blackens with soot and sweat, cloaks stiffen with layers of grime, and the smell of unwashed bodies mingles with the acrid smoke of dying fires. The cold is cruel, but sometimes it is the squalor that feels deadlier. Chroniclers recorded that medieval camps were breeding grounds for misery. Men rarely washed in winter, water frozen or hoarded for drinking, waste piled at the camp's edges, sometimes freezing into grotesque mounds. More men fell to sickness than steel, one observer wrote after a winter siege, hinting that dirt and damp may have claimed more lives than enemy swords. Among the soldiers themselves, a peculiar debate simmered. Which was the greater killer, the frost or the filth? Some swore the cold, hardened men, burning away weakness like a forge, while dirt rotted them from within. Others insisted the opposite. That disease was nothing compared to the way frost crept into lungs and joints. You hear such arguments now around the embers, tired voices trading misery like currency. Modern historians echo this uncertainty. Some point to chronicles full of fever and dysentery as evidence that sanitation, not cold, was the chief enemy. Others emphasize the relentless toll of frostbite and hypothermia. Archaeology reveals bones marked with both disease and injury, leaving no clear verdict. The truth, as always, lies in the tangled web of both. You glance around and see the evidence everywhere. Cloaks reek of damp smoke, boots caked in filth, rats scurry through bedding, their droppings scattered like dark seeds. A soldier scratches at lice beneath his collar, muttering curses. Another hacks a cough so deep it rattles his chest. The sound is more chilling than the wind. One curious trick emerges. Men sometimes rubbed their bodies with vinegar or strong wine, believing the sting killed pests and disease. Others burned herbs inside tents, letting the smoke drift across skin as a form of cleansing. The air tonight smells faintly of sage and rosemary, mixed into the haze. A ritual, perhaps, as much as a cure. And still the cold persists. You realize how these two enemies, frost and filth, worked together. When men shivered, their bodies weakened. When they weakened, sickness took hold. When sickness spread, the cold finished what it had begun. A soldier nearby sighs that he'd rather die clean in frost than rot in his own sweat. His comrade laughs bitterly, saying he'll take lice over losing toes. Their banter is weary, but it masks fear. Every man here knows both threats lurk in the dark, waiting. The air hangs thick, heavy with smoke, sweat and sickness. Yet despite the stench, the camp endures. Fires are stoked, cloaks pulled tighter, prayers whispered. In the face of cold and filth alike, survival continues. And so you realize, winter war was not fought against a single foe. It was a siege on all sides, frost outside, filth inside. Soldiers lay between them, enduring, because there was no choice but to wake each morning and face both again. The hours creep toward dawn, and suddenly the silence shatters with a deep, steady beat drums. They echo through the camp, slow at first, then faster, rattling like thunder on frozen air. Soldiers jolt awake, some groaning, some swearing, others fumbling for boots still stiff with frost. The sound is irresistible. It drags every man from his cloak and straw. Chroniclers often mention these drums as the pulse of an army. They roused men at sunrise, signaled orders, and prepared hearts for battle. One account from the Italian Wars notes, the men rose more from fear of silence ending than from the drum itself. The beat was not gentle, it was command in rhythm, insisting that sleep end and movement begin. A curious tradition clung to these mornings. Some believed the drum's echo drove away evil spirits of the night, scattering them before the first light. Others said it stirred courage in the blood, as if each beat synchronized hearts for war. Whether superstition or psychology, you feel it now the way the rhythm vibrates through the chest, shaking off icy lethargy. Modern scholars argue about how effective drum signals were in the chaos of medieval life. Some claim they were indispensable for coordinating large forces, while others believe their use was mostly symbolic, given how easily sound was swallowed by wind or terrain. Excavated instruments, wooden frames, stretched skins suggest both utility and ritual, leaving room for interpretation. Around you, the camp lurches to life. Fires roar as they're stoked with fresh wood, smoke billowing upward in thick clouds. Horses whinny, stamping against frost, their breath steaming in rhythm with the drums. Men stumble out of tents, rubbing sleep from eyes, groaning as joints protest. Yet with each beat, movement steadies. The noise gathers them like a shepherd's crook. You feel the weight of fatigue still clinging, limbs heavy, back sore, breath shallow, but the drum insists. One soldier mutters he'd rather sleep forever, but even he drags himself upright. Another smirks, saying the drum is louder than hunger. Their jokes are brittle, but the rhythm drives them on regardless. An odd custom emerges here. Some soldiers pressed hands to the earth as the drum sounded, believing they drew strength from the ground itself. Others clenched fists over their hearts in time with the beat, swearing it locked courage in place. You see both gestures now, small rituals against fear. The camp transforms quickly. Cloaks, flappers' men fasten belts, shields thud against frozen soil, swords rasp from scabbards. The soundscape is no longer one of sleep, and coughing it is a forge being stoked, iron and leather awakening with men's bodies. The smell shifts too. Smoke thickens, mingled with sweat newly risen, sharp and bracing. And still the drums pound. They are relentless, echoing into the fields, carrying further than the camp's edge. Perhaps the enemy hears them too, a warning that the army still breathes after another brutal night. You stand straighter, body warming with movement. The stiffness remains, but the rhythm forces blood through frozen veins. The night has ended not with peace, but with percussion. And so you realize, in medieval camps, dawn was not gentle. It came with drums, dragging exhausted men from straw and smoke into motion. The beat was both order and omen, the heartbeat of survival before the day's march or battle began. The drums fade, replaced by chatter and the metallic clang of men arming themselves. Yet amid the bustle, voices trade stories not of strategy or orders, but of survival. Around every fire, soldiers share tales of those who endured impossible cold, legends that make this night's suffering seem almost light by comparison. Chroniclers captured these anecdotes, though often with flourishes. One tale told of German mercenaries who slept through a blizzard so fierce that their tents vanished beneath snow, yet by morning they dug themselves free, alive and laughing. Another claimed that during a Polish campaign, men froze standing at their posts, weapons clutched in stiff hands, while their comrades swore their spirits still guarded the camp. Whether fact or exaggeration, these stories gave hope where firewood could not. A peculiar legend recurs, that the strongest soldiers were born in frost. Men bragged they were winter-forged, their blood thicker, their lungs sharper. A few insisted that drinking icy water before sleep made them wake stronger, as if tested and approved by the cold itself. Strange logic, yet in the haze of exhaustion, belief gave warmth. Scholars continue to argue whether these tales reflect real events or were morale-building inventions. Were armies truly caught in nights so deadly that only a handful endured? Or were these stories meant to inspire courage in men shivering under thin cloaks? Evidence is scarce, chronicles blur myth and fact so thoroughly that certainty is impossible. But perhaps that uncertainty was the point. Legends don't need truth, they need resonance. You sit near a group of veterans retelling their favorites. One insists he once saw a comrade sleep half buried in snow, only to wake without frostbite, grinning as if blessed. Another tells of a knight who refused both fire and fur, claiming his faith kept him warm, and though mocked, he never fell ill. The younger recruits listen wide-eyed, their own misery shrinking against the backdrop of these extraordinary survivors. The soundscape is different here, less groaning, more laughter, as if myth itself lightens the air. The flicker of fire dances across eager faces, turning hardship into shared folklore. Each story is embroidered further, details growing bolder with every retelling. Truth doesn't matter. The rhythm of survival is what counts. An odd superstition appears in their words, that those who spoke of freezing never froze. To talk of it, to name it, was to keep it at bay. So men boasted loudly, exaggerating their coldest nights, as if bragging alone would thicken their cloaks. Perhaps it worked, perhaps only the silence killed. The smell of roasting scraps drifts again, mixing with smoke and damp earth, a reminder that life presses on. Stories swell louder, rising with the warmth of fire. You feel the pull of these legends too, their exaggeration carrying you further from the misery at hand. And so you realize, survival in medieval battle camps was not only physical, it was also narrative. Men endured not just by fire and cloak, but by telling stories of others who had endured worse. Legends became blankets, myths became fuel, and in their glow, frost retreated if only for a little while. The legends fade into silence as the night finally begins to thin. The fires, once roaring, are now nothing more than heaps of glowing coals. You sit close, feeling their heat dwindle, the embers pulsing faintly like the last heartbeats of a dying giant. Around you, soldiers huddle tighter, cloaks drawn close, bodies pressed together in instinctive clusters. Sleep comes in fragments, an hour here, a few minutes there, but somehow it is enough. Chroniclers often remarked on this liminal time, just before dawn, when the camp hovered between exhaustion and duty. They noted how the faint glow of embers kept men alive, though barely, and how soldiers stared into the red coals as if divining their fates. Some even believed the shapes in the ashes foretold the coming day. A bright spark meant victory, a dark heap meant death. Superstition turned dying fire into oracle. An odd practice sometimes noted in letters was that men spat into the embers before sleeping, believing it locked their warmth into the fire, which would return it by morning. Others traced symbols in the ash, charms against cold and fear. Strange, perhaps, but you can picture the comfort it gave ritual layered atop survival. Historians still question whether embers truly offered much warmth. Some argue that the glow kept frost at bay long enough for rest. Others suggest it was purely psychological, a reminder that heat had once existed and might return. Excavated fire pits in old encampments reveal circles of ash surrounded by sleeping areas, suggesting that even illusion mattered. You lean forward, watching sparks crumble into powder. The smell of wood smoke lingers, clinging to hair and cloak, marking you as a creature of fire. The camp is quiet now, save for the occasional cough, the restless snort of a horse, the faint whistle of wind slipping between tents. The night is not gone, but its grip loosens. A soldier beside you stirs, mumbling in his sleep. Another shifts, tugging the last bit of warmth from a fading ember. Their faces are pale, lips cracked, yet their bodies endure. They are still here. That is the only victory the night offers. And so you see the truth. In medieval battle camps, survival was rarely glorious. It was not fire alone, or straw, or cloak, or prayer that saved men. It was all of them together, layered, fragile, imperfect. Embers glowed low, but they glowed enough. Companions pressed close, and that was enough. Faith whispered, stories comforted, myths amused, and somehow, dawn always came. Now the camp quiets even more, the rhythm of breathing slow and steady, the world muted under snow and smoke. You let your gaze linger on the last coals, dim pulses fading into darkness. Each ember seems slower now, each flicker stretching into long, soft waves of light. The fire's glow touches the canvas walls, sinking gently until the shadows grow still. You feel the frost outside, but it no longer presses so hard. The night, once sharp and merciless, has softened into something almost forgiving. The soldiers around you breathe in unison, their bodies heavy, their minds drifting far from the battlefield. The camp becomes a cradle of sound, gentle snores, the faint rustle of straw, the sigh of wind pushing lightly against cloth. Even the animals are calm. Horses stand quietly, their breath slower, their eyes half closed. Dogs curl into tight circles. The camp, for this brief moment, belongs to sleep alone. You feel yourself joining them, shoulders loosening, eyes heavy. The smell of smoke is fainter now, like the memory of warmth. The stars overhead are pale, dimmed by the weight of cloud. The night feels endless, yet you know it bends toward dawn. And with dawn comes light, and with light comes another chance. So rest here, wrapped in the quiet. Let the world outside fade. The frost will wait, the drums will wait, the battle will wait. But for now, there is only this: the hush of a camp at peace, the glow of a fire fading, and the comfort of knowing that even in the hardest nights, men endured, and so can you. Sleep well, traveller. The embers are low, but they are enough. Sweet dreams.